Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I have started this recording, so you all are now officially notified. Thank you for joining us today. We have a super exciting lineup and panel for everyone to listen to our agencies on how some of the funding is going to be coming through, what they'll be doing, and how you all can maybe take part in that. A couple announcements for today. Just in general, you know, you can always find our webinars, our past webinars on our YouTube channel. So you can either search for that or find it directly at our website, a link there. Our next webinar will be in the September range, to be confirmed, with our announcement that'll come out in another few weeks on fish passage projects in Alaska by Heather Hansen and Jess Straub. And then also AFS has asked us to let everyone know about this social networking event that they have coming up. You can find it on their website. If you're quick, you can probably get to this QR code, and they'd love to see you at this event. Learn more chat more with colleagues doing the same type of work. All right, so today I want to announce our speakers. We have actually seven people talking to you today. So we're just going to go through quick with their names, their titles, and then let them get to it. Today we have Mike Bailey, National Aquatic Habitat Coordinator with Fish and Aquatic Conservation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Shannon Boyle, we don't think she's talking, but she had some contributions for Mike's presentation there, so I wanted to make sure to get her name on here as well. We have Nat Gillespie, Assistant National Fish Program Leader with the U.S. Forest Service. Mindy Simmons, Senior Policy Advisor, Headquarters U.S. Army Corps. Also from Headquarters U.S. Army Corps is Amy Babby, National Program Manager. Dan Buford, Ecologist from Federal Highway Administration's Headquarters Office of Project Development and Environmental Review. Melanie Gange from NOAA Fisheries Office of Habitat Conservation, and Tim Welch, Hydropower Program Manager, Department of Energy, Water Power Technologies Office. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and kick this off with Mike talking to us about his program's opportunities. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Kathy. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Great. So thank you for the invitation. I'm Mike Bailey, the National Aquatic Habitat Coordinator, to talk about some of the fish passage program BIL through the Fish and Wildlife Service. Our mission is we work with partners to engage the public using science-based approaches to conserve, restore, and enhance fish and other aquatic resources for the continued benefit of the American people. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law provides a total of about $455 million to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's all coming in through 5 existing programs. It's coming in through the Klamath, Lake Tahoe, Sage Steppe, and Delaware River program. Some of those may have a bit of fish passage in them, but really I'm here today to talk about the National Fish Passage Program, which was awarded $200 million under the BIL funding. The National Fish Passage Program is an existing program. It provides technical expertise, financial assistance, and coordination support to complete aquatic ecosystem restoration projects. We work with federal agencies, state governments, private landowners, tribes, NGOs to restore fish passage and aquatic connectivity by removing or bypassing barriers. So as I mentioned before, we're an existing program. We're a cooperative conservation program. Most of that is relying on our network of Fish and Wildlife Service biologists in the field. We also have engineers in the field. We are a voluntary program, so we don't make people do stuff. We help them do stuff. Are my slides advancing?
But they have been. Right now,
okay.
It looks like you might be a little stuck right now. It's on the funded programs include Klamath,
Oh, okay.
Lake Tahoe, Sage. So they were, but I don't know that they are.
Okay.
Maybe unshare and, well, now it moved again. Now we're at the National Fish Program slide.
Okay. Let's go. I'll just, oh, it sounds like from the chat, everyone is seeing things in different order.
Yes.
Okay. Well, so I guess that's not on my end. So we will, I'm just going to keep talking.
Yeah, keep going. And for those of you who are having trouble keeping up, we are at 371 and counting participants. So this is probably pushing our team's webinar to a nice strong limit here. So hopefully we'll your end will clear up. I think it's good as we can do on our end.
Unshare and reshare really quickly to see if that can bring at least a couple people back to where they should be. Okay. So we're cooperative. We're voluntary, so we work with voluntary partners. We do coastal and inland waterways. So our eligible applicants, any entity can receive funding. So we're not limited to only states or tribes or anything like that. We're everyone should be able to apply. When it comes to eligible projects, we're really looking for partial or complete elimination of a barrier so that fish and other aquatic species have better access to historic habitats. When it comes to the different eligible projects, one thing we don't do is we don't fund, I'll turn off my camera. We don't fund aspects like if in a FERC license, it says they must build a fishway. We don't provide funding for that kind of work. But typically we work with dams, culverts, inefficient fishways, water diversions, fish screens, and some with helping flow. So we were able to, as an existing program, be able to move this forward. So we've actually already announced our fiscal year 22 projects. So I'm going to walk through kind of what we did in the previous 6 months and then how we look to move forward. So first thing we did was we developed some criteria. We reached out to the regions and had all the regions submit a list of projects. We developed a scoring panel internal to kind of headquarters with our partners from the regions to move forward with the selecting panel. Came up with a list, finalized that list, to move that list up for approval. And in April, we publicly announced the list. So we've already, dollars are already able to be spent by some of these projects that were chosen. Our different selection criteria for this year was we looked at benefits for priority species, shovel readiness. We wanted to make sure some of these projects weren't too far in the future. We looked at benefits to climate resilience, benefits to public safety, benefits to disadvantaged communities. We also wanted to find projects that had permanence to fish passage benefit, so they weren't little fixes, but they were going to last for a long time. We also looked at how much partner match and partner leverage helped with the programs. And then we wanted to make sure our projects had a strong partner involvement and community support. When it came to the scoring panel, all of the projects were submitted by the Fish and Wildlife Service regions. There was scoring and prioritization within the regions. They brought headquarters a list of projects. We had a cross-program scoring panel from folks from the regions and from different groups in Fish and Wildlife Service to help move it forward. And then we developed the final project list. The Fish Passage Program BIL funding project list was released April 11th of this year. So again, these are already out there. We picked about 40 different fish passage projects. Several of those projects had multiple barriers. So some folks took like a watershed approach in which maybe they had one project, but that project involved 15 different culverts in a certain area. We engaged about 20 those projects went out to about 23 different states and working in 23 different states in Puerto Rico. If everything goes well, we'll open up about 5,000 stream miles, and we brought about $34 million in match. We had many partnerships. Almost all of our projects that go out are partnership based. So we engaged with about 36 different states, 22 different federal agencies. The projects had that, and about 10 of those projects that went out had some sort of tribal engagement. So because we moved very quickly with the fiscal year 22 projects, we're looking to redefine and reassess how we move forward with fiscal year 23 and beyond. This year, we're going to refine our selection criteria. In the fall, after those selection criteria are developed, we're going to ask our regions and our field offices to develop proposed list. And then as we move through the winter, try to come up with a finalized project list to move forward in case we want to be able to get some funds on the ground for the summer of 23. So again, we moved quickly with 22. We're moving nearly equally quickly with 23 to help keep stuff moving. We know there's spots we can improve in how we move forward with this. One thing is we're having a higher level federal agency coordination meeting in June. That'll be a directorate level meeting. And then a stakeholder workshop in July, where we try to build on existing partnerships with groups like AFWA and the National Fish Habitat Partnership, and bring in some of our other federal partners and tribal partners and see how we can work better to move forward as a whole with BIL funding. We're going to have some listening sessions to gain more tribal engagement over the summer and the fall. We're going to continue to work with the administration and focus on that administration priority of Justice 40 and how can we better incorporate environmental justice into some of the project selection and implementation. And then communication. We want to make sure not only are we communicating internally with our partners well, but how do we tell the best story about fish passage and for the American people? How do we work on that? Part of that is going to be very soon. Hopefully, we'll have a geospatial dashboard that we'll be able to share some information of the projects moving forward. And this is just kind of my finishing slide there. Shannon Boyle helped me out with this presentation some. You know, one thing is the fish passage program works largely in the regions. So we have regional coordinators who do a lot of the heavy lifting in the field there. So it's something that if folks want to get engaged, they can certainly reach out to myself or Shannon, but reaching out and we can help you direct towards those regional and field level staff who are really the ones who do the brunt of the work.
Great. Thank you, Mike. There was somebody had asked if you could drop that project link into the chat.
Yes.
That would be great. A few folks would like to look at that. All right, and then let's see. I think so. We're going to do all the questions at the end, just to make sure we've got kind of time for all our presenters, and then we'll get back into questions in a bit. So, Nat, I believe you are next on presentation.
Okay. All right. Can you see that, buddy?
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna turn my camera off in case there's a bandwidth issue. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. Very inspiring stuff there, Mike. So let's talk about the Forest Service and the bill. A number of different projects. Let me give you a little background though first. Because it sets the context for the focus of a lot of the work on the Forest Service through the bill. So Forest Service mostly manages headwaters, as you probably know, across the National Forest System. So it's largely streams, first and second order. We have about 65,000 road stream crossings. And most of those our first and second order streams. And with the road network, we've done research, and basically we've found out that 50 to 90% of our road stream crossings, which are typically culverts, are inaccessible to different fish and aquatic species. So in the context of climate change, here's a picture of the arid western US, a dirt road crossing the green network of streams. Here's the 3 culverts circled in yellow. For the most part, those are likely going to be barriers to fish at some stage of their life cycle. And so, we're talking about culverts, and the culverts on the National Forest System are, come in all shapes and sizes, but the issues that we're dealing with, as you probably know, are barriers to fish and aquatic organisms because of a hydraulic jump on the left, or stream velocity, or the waters are just too shallow, as you can see on the right. But we do have dams. We do have diversion weirs. Those are mostly on the larger rivers, impacting fish like the Chinook salmon you see here, that need to migrate, as you know. And so, we're talking about not just impacts ecologically, but really huge impacts recreationally and to community resilience, health, and culture. So, just to set the context, we know that these barriers really impact aquatic biodiversity. And in fact, the research has shown that on a stream with aquatic barrier like an impassable culvert, that stream typically has lower numbers of species, lower genetic diversity, smaller fish, and they're really impacting a lot of our threatened endangered species like the candy darter, pictured here, recently listed by our colleagues at Fish and Wildlife Service. But we're talking about all aquatic organisms, so I just want to make sure that that's underscored here. Is aquatic organism passage is what we're all about. Here we have hellbender, northern water snake. Of course, they're impacted from these barriers, as are people and communities. And so, Forest Service, with the multiple use mission that we have, we're managing for recreation and all kinds of other industries. What we know from research is that these undersized culverts that are aquatic barriers are more prone to failure, with major impacts in the community. So aquatic barrier restoration is of course the win-win, and we have the solutions. And we know at the Forest Service that investing in these programs for restoring fish passage and aquatic organism passage is our #1 strategy for conserving aquatic biodiversity, and of course all these other benefits to the public and communities. So that's the context, and I'm going to briefly cover basically 6 programs in the bill that provide federal funding. You can see them listed here, and I'll start with the Legacy Roads and Trails Remediation Program. It's a big program, $250 million over 5 years. You can see the aquatic passage, reducing sediment, increasing climate resilience, and protecting source water protection are the criteria that Congress mandated. And the project types that we're seeing right now are a lot of AOPs, a lot of aquatic organism passage at culverts, some bridges, road decommissioning, road and trail relocation, fixing trail bridges. And so the Legacy Roads and Trails Remediation Program is an internal program, but because of Wyden authority, our forests and grasslands are doing work outside of the forest, because there's a benefit to Forest Service resources. That's typically fish, which migrate. So we do some good projects with the state, DNR, and other NGOs and tribes. And so we're in the process of reviewing that final list. We appropriated about $41.5 million to projects that has to be reviewed. It'll go public, but I'm seeing about 50 to 70 culvert projects on that list right now for the first year. The other big program which is right in the wheelhouse of Fish Passage and AOP, is this collaborative aquatic landscape restoration program. And this is $80 million over 5 years. And Congress designated two big criteria: fish passage and miles of water quality improved. And Congress wants to see the most miles for the least amount of federal investment. So they want cost-effective implementation, and it can be on federal, tribal, and non-federal lands. That request for proposals went out internally. They're due tomorrow. We're going to have another round of proposals in the first quarter of 2023. And this is a nice wide open program, you know, that is going to include projects like dam removal, irrigation, diversion, retrofits, culverts, watershed restoration, habitat water quality. The other interesting point here about this program is Congress had requested that the Forest Service show how many of our sub-watersheds move to an improved condition class at the end of 5 years. So that's a direct tie into our watershed condition framework, where we're trying to maintain or improve priority watersheds across the national forest system. Third program is dam decommissioning. It's, you know, it's pretty small at $10 million. Only in the context that we own about 1,100 dams. And the criteria are that the dams that will be decommissioned are Forest Service owned, they're non-hydropower and high hazard. And so this is, again, is an internal program, and we're focusing on high hazard dams. This will take care of about 5 or 10 of those. The next program in the bill that relates to this webinar is abandoned mineland restoration. So there's $100 million over 5 years for Forest Service, and also $100 million for the Department of Interior. And the criteria are, you know, what we do with abandoned mineland restoration right now with lots of partners, you know, mitigating hazards, water quality, vegetation, restoring streams. And this funding is for federal, non-federal lands. And so, you know, we're waiting to roll this project or this funding out, but we foresee it having, you know, lots of stream, floodplain restoration, as we're doing already, water quality mitigation, and some of those water quality impacts or channels are indeed fish barriers. So there's a fish barrier link in that program as well. The fifth program I wanted to mention that I'm sure many of you are tracking is the NFWF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation America the Beautiful Challenge. And the link to Forest Services, we're providing about $35 million over 5 years. That's both from our invasive species funding and this collaborative aquatic landscape program. And there's some criteria, and they're directly related to fish passage. You know, expand aquatic habitat connectivity, conserve at-risk species. This program is only eligible for states, tribes, and territories, and NGOs are encouraged to collaborate with one of those to apply to NFWF. And the project types are large. You know, they want collaborative, large-scale projects that, you know, go on and off federal land. So there's lots of good opportunity here for fish passage and AOP with America the Beautiful. And there's a lot of different match requirements that I'm not going to have time to go over. And then finally, the bill authorized an increase in our federal lands transportation program. So that's our FLTP, which we work with federal highways to fund. That's, you know, pretty good funding. Again, $130 million over 5 years, and it is for all kinds of transportation work, but that will include bridges, culverts, road relocation, and other things that will benefit water quality and fisheries. So with that, Kathy, I'll end, and I guess we'll take questions later.
Yes, great. Thanks, Nat. All
Thank
right,
you.
so I believe we're moving on to Mindy.
Yes, I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And I will wait for the slides to come up. There we go. So I'll get started while the slides get moving here. So my name is Mindy Simmons. I'm a senior policy advisor at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers headquarters. And I also have on the call with me today, Amy Babby, who's our CAP program manager. You'll learn a little bit more about that program later on, and I will turn it over to her. So we, do have some significant opportunities, very unique opportunities for the Corps that were presented to us in Iija. We refer to it as that, specific to in-stream barrier removal. So next slide. But before I dive into that, some folks may be wondering why the Corps is this at all. A lot of folks think of us as the ones who build barriers, which we certainly have done a lot of that. The Corps does have several missions, including navigation, flood and disaster risk reduction, but I've circled here environment and aquatics ecosystem restoration as a significant civil works mission. It's actually our third largest mission area. Then we have these others that many of you are familiar with: hydropower, water supply. So next slide. So I did want to just highlight that we have a significant aquatic ecosystem restoration program, and that mission focuses on restoring degraded ecosystem structure, function, and/or the processes to a more condition. And really, because the Corps manages so much water with our reservoirs and systems, our focus when we do restoration is usually on restoring those underlying fluvial processes within a system, not just kind of a band-aid fix. So our emphasis is usually on the larger regionally or nationally significant ecosystems, where the solution would involve modifying that hydrology or geomorphology. And I've listed some examples here of where we typically have significant amounts of funding: South Florida system restoration, Upper Mississippi River restoration, where we focus on addressing impacts of the locks and dams we constructed on that system, Missouri River Recovery Program, Chesapeake Bay oysters, Columbia River fish mitigation. This includes addressing issues related to our Columbia Basin and Willamette Basin dams, lots of efforts in Puget Sound and several on the Gulf Coast. So we're kind of all over the map. Next slide. And typically that program receives, just for a ballpark, about $400 to $600 million a year in congressional appropriations, a little bit more in recent years. So I did want to point out a couple unique things about the Corps and how we receive our funding, because it's a little bit different than some of the other agencies. And we're not a granting agency. We just don't do that well. We generally do not put out like an RFP and go give other entities money. Our funding is appropriated by project or program, and we do, since about 1986, require all of our projects non-federal sponsor who is also cost sharing that work. And that's really so that we're providing the federal dollars and there's a little in the activities that we do. And you can see the map just shows an example of where all those ecosystem restoration projects are throughout the country, obviously focused on water, not a lot in the arid Southwest. Go ahead to the next slide. So with that background, IIJA presented a huge opportunity to the Corps. Overall, we received $17 billion for all of our mission areas, and the Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration Program alone received $1.9 billion. So remember, that's relative to the $400 to $600 million that we usually get in a given year. Plus, and I will say about that, we have released the breakdown of where we are spending that money in a spend plan. It's not focused on barrier removal, so I didn't include it here, but I provide that if folks are interested. Another element is that we were provided $465 million to our what we call Continuing Authorities Program, or CAP program. And this is a program that tends to focus on the smaller projects, so less than a 10 million federal share. They still do require a non-federal partner. And then this included a specific about something we've never really seen before. That was $115 million specifically for removal of in-stream barriers to be carried out under our CAP 206 program, which is our Ecosystem Restoration Authority for small projects. So we refer to this as our in-stream barrier removal carve-out. And I'll just summarize that really quickly, then I'm going to turn it over to Amy to talk about the eligibility criteria and the ranking criteria. So it's $115 million specifically for in-stream barrier removal. And because it's to be carried out under our CAP 206 authority, it can cover the feasibility, the design, and the construction or implementation phase of the projects. That program covers all of those. It also allowed for technical assistance, which doesn't necessarily have to result in the Corps using the funding to say implement the project. It removed the per project limit, usually it's limited to 10 million. So that was a huge major change. And then we also are usually subject to annual program limits, which were also removed. And then this also removed the non-federal cost share requirement. So it is 100% federal funding, although as Amy will discuss, we still do need a non-federal partner, and that may still involve some amount of funding on their behalf. And the only real was that it could not be used on federal hydropower dams. And then we were allowed to allocate $1 million in FY22, and Amy's going to talk a little bit about that. With that, I will turn it over to Amy, and she'll cover the eligibility criteria and the implementation.
Thanks, Mindy. I'm also going to keep my camera off to save some bandwidth. And as Mindy said, I am the Continuing Authorities Program Manager at headquarters. And so that management includes this Section 206, or this in-stream barrier carve-out program. So what does that program allow us to do? The first is that any project proposed for in-stream barrier removal must meet the intent of our Section 206 program. It must include the removal of in-stream barriers. As Mindy said, it cannot involve the federal hydropower dams. And from a decision perspective, policy approach, we made the determination that this program, the in-stream barrier removal program under the CAP program, would only apply to either new start studies or new phase design implementation. And just taking a quick step back, there are only two phases in the CAP program. One is the study phase, the other is the design implementation phase. We will not be able to convert a project that is currently within one of those phases to this 100% federal carve-out program. If the project is currently in feasibility, it'll have to wait until it completes feasibility and then potentially transition into this carve-out program for design and implementation. Mindy did say that it is 100% federally funded. And with that non-federal sponsor contribution, the first step of that, we're going to go through a little bit more of the process in a moment, but they must submit a letter of intent in order to even be considered for the carve-out program. And they ultimately must sign a cost share agreement, both for the feasibility phase and the design implementation phase. But Mindy talked about that this program is 100% federally funded. That does come with some caveats. And those include the non-federal sponsor must still provide the real estate components of one of the core projects. And that's what we call LERDs, or lands, easement, rights of way, relocations, and disposal areas, still required to be provided by the non-federal sponsor. That sponsor is also responsible for any HTRW issues, and they will be ultimately responsible for any operation and maintenance of the project after the barriers have been removed. So what are our selection criteria? From aquatic ecosystem restoration perspective, we do have some criteria that we look at not only for the CAP program, but for our specifically authorized program as well. And those criteria center on habitat scarcity, connectivity, plan recognition, sensitive species, and hydrologic and geomorphic character. Not all of those are weighted equally. We look at each of those criteria when making the decision for an individual project. What's interesting, though, is that Iija, or BIL, whichever you would like to call it, did not define any specific criteria that must be used in order to select projects for this in-stream barrier carve-out. All eligible projects will be identified and ranked by your local core district, and then reviewed and ranked by the division offices, which are the offices that cover, Mindy showed you the map earlier that had the watershed base of our division offices. They will rank any potential projects as well. And then those rankings of eligible projects will be validated by headquarters USACE, by me from the program perspective, as well as from our planning folks like Mindy, our senior policy advisors that would look at it from an aquatic ecosystem restoration perspective. The number of projects that we will select has not been decided. The reason is that we are limited to the $115 million. And as you're going to see in a moment, the initial list of eligible projects already exceeds that total dollar amount. So what is the application process? The first step is to identify a potential non-federal sponsor. Our districts have been working within their area of responsibility to identify potential sponsors. But this workshop, this is a great opportunity to identify other potential projects that may be considered for this in-stream barrier removal program. So the first step, again, is to identify that sponsor. They will reach out to the local Corps of Engineers district, and there's a link in the presentation here that takes you to an interactive map where you can find the local Corps district based on a street address or location of a potential project. The Corps district will conduct a site visit if necessary, and then eventually that non-federal sponsor will submit a letter of intent. This is the official application for a carve-out project. And that information must include the location of the in-stream barrier removal, a description of how it meets the criteria, and more specifically that it does not affect federal hydropower dams, that it does involve that in-stream barrier removal. It's a pretty simple process to go through for that description, how it meets the criteria. A description of habitat scarcity scores and the justification for those scores, as well as a description of any expected ecological benefits. We also would like for the non-federal sponsor to include any existing data or risks and issues that may be associated with the dam removal. And the best example I can give of that is a dam that might be located on private property or located in an adjacent community where that community might not be as interested in removing the dam as the non-federal sponsor is. So if it's something where a sponsor cannot obtain access, an easement, real estate, a letter of support from that adjacent community could accompany this letter of intent. And also that commitment to serve as a cost share sponsor. So the next two slides, I'm just going to show you very quickly the current draft eligible project list. These are projects that have been identified by our core districts, and you'll see just some basic information, the location. These are sorted by state, just in case there was a particular project for which you may be looking. And then it will show you the expected cost to complete the feasibility study and the expected cost to complete design implementation. If the project did not have a known cost for design implementation, we are using the old federal limit of 10 million just as a starting point to figure out total project. And if you go to the second slide of this list, you'll see at the bottom in green, it talks about the total cost of these projected projects. And you can see already that the combination of feasibility and design implementation is well over the $115 million that has been allocated for the removal of in-stream barriers with the Corps of Engineers program. So we'll make the selection on the projects, or we get our list of potential projects. What happens next? We don't need any specific authorization to begin the study phase, which is the beautiful thing about the Continuing Authorities program. We already have authorization to both study, design, and construct, provided that it meets the basic tenets of the CAP program. But how are we going to decide? How are we going to prioritize these projects? So funds will be allocated and prioritized. First, we will look at completions. Earlier, I think you heard one of the other agencies talking about shovel-ready projects. We want to do the same thing from the Corps' perspective, in that projects that are ready to move in design implementation actually have boots on the ground removing something or building something as our first prioritization effort. The second would be new start studies with viable and willing non-federal sponsors. And then there are other things that we are going to take into consideration. One of those would be congressional interest. If there is a letter of support from a member of Congress, if there's a letter of support from adjacent communities for the project. And then we will also be looking at anticipated ecological benefits. None of these criteria from a prioritization perspective will be considered singly. We will look at all of these together to make the decisions on which projects to fund first. We will also be applying the existing Continuing Authorities program policies as well as the SMART planning principles. And don't have a lot of time to go into those today, but it is a set criteria on how we process our studies and how we implement programs, or excuse me, projects under the Continuing Authorities program. We will be required for the sponsor to sign those cost share agreements for both phases. But just to give you an idea, a typical CAP study takes between 1 and 2 years, and design implementation can be completed in 1 to 3 years. And it's a pretty broad range for that completion. The reason that we have such a broad range is that some of our projects are simpler. You might be able to complete a project in a year, but we have to consider that some portions of the Corps' area of responsibility may have very small construction windows. 2 to 3 months in a year where construction can complete. And so that construction may have to extend over more than 1 year. So what are the benefits of this IIJA in-stream barrier removal program? The great thing is it gives us relatively broad authority to complement the other agencies' barrier removal programs, as well as leverage the Corps' investments in projects that we're looking at through the Continuing Authorities program. We also want to marry our project with some of these other federal agencies to provide regional ecological lift, something that could be looked at not just from the Corps' perspective, but what can we do, possibly combine projects, look at how we're funding projects within a particular watershed to provide that lift within a region. The other thing we want to be able to do, and this is an interesting component that Mindy talked about with the IIJA in-stream barrier carve-out program, is there is the opportunity to provide technical assistance. And what that assistance is let's say the picture that you see here is from the Green River Lock and Dam number 6 in Kentucky. There have been some dams removed on the Green River. They're actually Corps-owned dams, but there was not funding that was provided to actually remove a Corps dam. So what we have been able to do is partner with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to come in and remove those dams, but some work still needs to be done from a Corps perspective. That technical assistance funding can be used to provide either in-house labor or other support to other federal agencies that may be removing dams if there is a tie back to a Corps project or Corps program. And just to wrap up, here's some contact information for both Mindy and myself. Either one of us would be happy to answer any questions here at the end that have been posted in the chat. And also just to remind you, though, that if you think you have a project you'd like to move forward with, the best way to start is to reach out to your local Corps district. So that's all for me. Kathy, back to you.
Great. Thank you. All right, let's see. Who do we have next here? Dan, I think you're up next.
I am, and thank you. So I'm Dan Buford. I'm an ecologist with the Federal Highways Administration's headquarters office. And in our Office of Project Development and Environmental Review. And I chose for my background today a covert, but now I realize we're talking about coverts for fish, and I chose one that was a covert for vehicles to pass safely across a landscape occupied by animals. And so my apologies, I'll work on that. But maybe it's good, it's also a lucky thing because there were a lot of elements in the bill that require us to evaluate when we're looking at reconstructing bridges and culverts and tunnels, to requiring us to evaluate whether or not we could make improvements for both aquatic and terrestrial passage of wildlife. And so let's keep that in mind as we go along. So let me upload my slides here. Nope. Oh boy. Slideshow. There we go. All right. And so Congress included in bill a new discretionary grant program for federal highways. We don't normally run a lot of discretionary grant programs, but we sure got a lot of them in bill. This one is the National Covert Removal, Replacement, and Restoration Grant Program. In that program, you know, it's, as I said, it's a new one. We are, I probably don't have as much to present on it today as some of the previous agencies, because this is a new grant program for us. And before we really get into much detail on it, we were required to consult with NOAA Fisheries and with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in how we're going to establish the program to award grants to eligible entities for covert replacements and for weirs, which is an interesting inclusion. So part of what's I guess what's this grant program is directed at is for that's replacement, removal, or restoration of culverts and weirs that would meaningfully improve or restore fish passage for anadromous fish. And so that's one key thing to focus on. This program is fairly limited then to coastal waterways and making improvements for anadromous fish. And then, as I was saying, that you know, with respect to the law also said with respect to weirs that we may include infrastructure to facilitate fish passage around or over weirs or weir improvements. Another important thing to note is our program funding, and this was a point of confusion, I think, for a lot of folks, including us, some of us within the agency. As you looked at the bill, you might have seen that Congress authorized for funding $800 million per year for this program. However, in bill, they funded us at the level of $200 million per year. Now, it's possible in future funding cycles that Congress could add money back in or add money into the program up to that authorized level. But that'll have to see what Congress does in future years with their funding bills. But for now, we are funded at $200 million per year. I'll also note that up to 2% of the funds are available for each fiscal year for administrative expenses for both us at Federal Highways, for Fish and Wildlife, and for NIPS. That's a rather low overhead, I might add. So the eligible entities for these grants are states, units of local government, and Indian tribes. States and local governments have a 20% cost share. Indian tribes have none. So prior to developing the notice of funding opportunity, our team, like I said, needs to consult with NIMS and the Fish and Wildlife Service. And what we were charged with are these three elements in that consultation. It's developing a process to provide technical assistance to tribes and underserved communities to assist with project design and grant process and procedures. The second element was establishing a procedure to prioritize awarding grants. And the third was establishing a process for determining criteria for awarding grants. That's fairly verbatim in how it's written in bill. And other things we have to do is develop an evaluation plan for application review and a selection process. and develop administration policy and other bill-related criteria involved as it relates to policies that this administration has for climate change and resilience of infrastructure and aquatic and terrestrial passage, equity and environmental justice, and of course safety. And with that, I'll just note that we've got a team at Federal Highways that are focused on this. It's myself, again, from the Office of Project Development and Environmental Review. My colleague, Joe Krolak, is with our Office of Infrastructure. And then Brian Yanchik, who is with our resources side, with our technical assistance side. And with that, I will hand it back over to the next speaker.
Thanks, Dan. All right, Melanie, you're ready to go. I see. Go for it.
All right. And are you seeing my presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, everybody. My name is Melanie Gange. I'm speaking to you today from Maryland in an area that was previously the homeland of the Anacostan people. And as you are aware of by now, since you've come to this presentation, you know that the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was signed last year, and we at NOAA see this as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to make an impact for habitat across the country. There was $1.2 trillion in the law overall, which results in about $3 billion for NOAA over the next 5 years, with a significant amount of that funding available for habitat conservation and coastal resilience efforts. I work within the Office of Habitat Conservation with our grants programs, so I'll primarily be speaking about those programs today, but one of those does include the fish passage provision that many in this group are going to be most interested in. The Act is providing approximately $891 million over 5 years for Office of Habitat Conservation programs, and this is divided into 2 separate provisions. Our Habitat Restoration and Resilience provision provides $491 million across the 5 years to provide funding and technical assistance to restore marine, estuarine, and Great Lakes ecosystems, and to help prevent flood damage in coastal communities. This investment helps protect the safety and well-being of coastal communities by buffering shorelines from erosion, reducing flooding, and removing potentially hazardous structures. Fish passage projects, including dam removal, will be eligible for this funding. The fish passage specific provision allocates $400 million over 5 years to enhance fish passage by removing barriers and providing technical assistance. These funds will help protect and restore habitats that sustain fisheries, recover protected species, and maintain resilient ecosystems and communities. Back in February, we held 2 tribal engagement sessions, which sought early tribal input on 3 of the bill provisions that included our fish passage provision, with the other 2 being the Pacific Coast Salmon Recovery Fund and the Regional Ocean Partnership. And we took written comments from tribes through March 22nd of 22. Since we've gone through that process, we understand a little bit about the focus of our funding. We do see this as a really great opportunity over the next 5 years to accomplish removing in-stream barriers. And we will be looking at funding all phases of a barrier removal project, from stakeholder engagement through implementation and monitoring. We do anticipate 2 separate fish passage funding opportunities. One will be open to all applicants and the other open to federally recognized tribes. The federally recognized tribes and also partnerships with federally recognized tribes are also encouraged to apply to our larger fish passage opportunity open to all applicants. Our application process is going to use grants.gov. If your organization is not already registered in grants.gov, then that is something that you can start now. And you can use grants.gov to enter keywords that it will then notify you about when topics come up of interest to you. In order to get registered in grants.gov, you also need to be registered with the System for Award Management, SAM.gov, and that is a slightly longer process, which is why it can be helpful to get ready on your own time frame instead of once you see a funding opportunity come out. NOAA has 5 standard evaluation criteria that we use across competitions. Those are going to be importance and applicability, scientific and technical merit, applicant qualifications, project costs, and outreach and education. So you can, in general, think about your application in terms of those topics. Within those topics, we do expect that our project selection criteria and program priorities will adapt over time. Our fish passage community has an opportunity here to accomplish a lot of our long-held goals and begin to look forward to the next thing. And so when these funding opportunities are published, we do encourage you to contact the points of contact that will be listed in those funding opportunities and let us know what it is you want to accomplish, because this will help us understand what the fish passage community's needs are both now and for the future. There are some other funding sources in the infrastructure law for habitat conservation and restoration, and our Office of Habitat Conservation is going to collaborate with other offices and programs across NOAA and the other federal agencies you're hearing from today to ensure that we're helping people successfully plan and implement complex restoration projects that are going to have benefits to both fisheries and communities. And through all of these various funding elements of the Infrastructure Act, we do look forward to continuing to work closely with NOAA partners and non-federal partners to coordinate efforts and make a real beneficial and collective impact. And so I thank you all for your time, and Kathy will tell us at the end when it's time for questions.
Great, thank you, Melanie. I do realize there's a whole lot of chat going on and the messages and some of your questions are being answered by the speakers as they have a chance to review the chat. But we will try to catch up on everything that hasn't been answered at the end. So there will be lots to talk about for sure. Okay, I think we have one more to go. And I think that's with Tim.
All right. Thank you, Kathy. I'm Tim Welch with the Department of Energy, the Water Power Technologies Office. We do research and development for hydropower. Specifically, I'm the manager of the hydropower program. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit under our theme today about some of the funding in the bill that the Water Power Technologies Office received for certain projects involved with non-federal hydropower. So I'm going to share my slides here. Hello. And is this working?
Yep, you're a go.
Okay. So anyway, I wanted to start off by saying that we really are a R&D agency, but Congress has given us this funding for these actually 3 different programs, one of which are of most interest to you. But unlike the other agencies, except for Dan in the Federal Highway Administration, we're going to have to build these programs from the ground up. We really have nothing in place, so we have a whole process laid out by which we're going to engage with the public, engage with the hydropower community, and build these programs and set up eligibility criteria. So just at a very high level, there's $910 million for hydropower and marine energy programs under the DOE. What I'm going to talk to you about today, the $753.6 million for what we're calling the hydropower incentive programs to improve efficiency, maintain dam safety, reduce environmental impacts, and to ensure generators continue to provide emission-free electricity. We also have, I'm not going to talk about this today, we have $10 million for a pump storage hydropower demonstration project, and then $36 million in general for our hydropower R&D program. So here are the specific hydropower incentive programs which we receive funding. The first is Section 242, and these are all sections of the Energy Policy Act of 2005. And Section 243 has been around since 2005. However, we didn't receive any funding for it until 2014. But we've been getting funding about the along the lines of about $7 to $8 million a year. But the infrastructure bill gave $125 million to be used until expended. Section 243, which improves existing hydropower facility and efficiency, that's also been around since 2005, but has never been funded until now. And through the infrastructure bill, we got $75 million again to last until expended. Now, here's the most important, and this is the brand new program, Section 247, which is what I'll focus on today. Maintaining and enhancing existing hydropowers through these three different areas: grid resilience, dam safety, and environmental improvements, to the tune of $554 million available until expended. So that's a brand new program. So quickly, I won't spend a lot of time in here. Section 242 provides funding for generation from hydropower development at non-power dams. This is adding more capacity to non-power dams, and with a cap on payment was increased by the bill from $750 to $1 million per entity, and again, it's $125 million. Section 243, improving generation efficiency by at least 3%. They changed the law, which we've never done before because it was just, as I said, it was just funded. The capital improvement for the funding raise was raised to from 10 to 30% of the total project costs, and the cap, like the other, raised to $5 million from $750 million. So here's the real one that I wanted to let you know about today, which is the Section 247, maintaining and enhancement of hydroelectricity. So incentive payments under here shall not exceed 30% of the cost of the capital improvement, not more than $5 million to any one facility in any fiscal year. The total amount available, $553,600,000. How they came up with such an uneven number is beyond me, but we'll be getting half in FY22 and the other half in FY23. Again, to remain available until expended. We think it's probably good for about 6 to 7 years, but we could be wrong. So who is eligible for this funding? So these are qualifying facilities, are FERC licensed projects. This is not available for the federal hydropower system. This is available for the non-federal fleet. And as I said, there are 3 areas of eligible improvements. So 3 areas of projects: improving grid resiliency, adapting to changing grid conditions, providing ancillary services to the grid, integrating other variable renewable sources of generation, facilitating, in other words, wind and solar, and managing accumulated reservoir sediments, which affects reservoir storage and generation flexibility. The other area is improving dam safety, so maintenance and upgrade of spillways, dam stability improvements, and upgrades and replacement of floodgates. Now, the third area is the environmental improvements. And here's the first one: adding or improving fish passage. Other eligible projects: improving water quality, providing downstream sediment transport processes, and improving recreational areas. So we presume that most of these projects stem from FERC license requirements, and that's what we're expecting. We will be speaking with FERC. We've already started some initial talks with FERC to make sure we understand exactly how FERC would work into our process. We are obviously not going to be funding anything that FERC hasn't already approved. So we'll have to figure out how that will all work. So as I said, we're having to develop the whole process here. And this is our timeline for putting together the process. ignoring section 242 and 243, focusing on the last row, section 247. What are we going to do? We're going to begin by doing a request for information, asking questions about criteria, how to prioritize between those three areas. And we're hoping to do that, issue that RFI in the end of June, keep it open for 60 days, and then hopefully holding a series of public workshops along the way, again, to gather information from the public and the hydropower community. Then we'll be preparing this fall, we're preparing some interim guidance. We'll request some public comment on draft guidance so that we can get right away early in FY23 to issue that guidance and open the first solicitation period for proposals early on in FY23, reviewing the applications in the spring, and then hopefully issuing our first payments for both 243 and 247 this fall. As I said earlier, 242 is something that we've been working on. This will be our 6th solicitation over the last 6 years, and we are currently reviewing applications received from FY21. We'll opening the next FY22 probably later on in the year. And that's really all I have. And here's some contact information from me. And my only request from you is please follow me on Twitter at TurbanTim70. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Tim. All right, Tim, I'll ask you to stop sharing, and if all of our presenters would like to come on camera, now would be a great time to get a reminder of your beautiful faces. Thank you all so much. This has been fantastic, tons of information. I know I was scribbling and scrabbling lots of notes, tons of chatter in the chat. We will, hopefully the chat, I believe the chat we can make available as well. I know a lot of questions got answered. I tried to track the ones that were not answered in chat. Okay, so we're going to start with some of those. So some of them you may have answered, and I apologize. You can just give the answer again. I know not everybody was tracking chat, so it will still be great to hear. For those of you who have asked questions, you can keep loading them up in chat. We will get to as many as we can. And everyone provided their contact information at the end. Hopefully you'll be able to get in touch if your question does not get answered. Okay, here we go. So I had a couple that did not seem to be answered. We'll start off at the top with Fish and Wildlife. Would hydropower that is FERC non-jurisdictional be able to receive funding?
Maybe. For certain types. Yeah, I've been having side chats about that very question. It would depend on exactly what they were asking for. Certainly, if it was a non-FERC dam that wanted to be removed, well, we could probably put some money to that. If it was something in which they want to build a fishway, I think we just have to get in the weeds and get some details.
Yeah, okay. And one question was about eligibility criteria, but I believe you addressed that. It was pushed in before you actually started talking about it. So I think for the next round, you're going to be whittling that down a little bit after this first set of funding goes through and you talk to your regions. Does that sound about right? Yeah. All right, very good. Okay, those are the two that I had at this point written down as unanswered from chat. So on to Forest Service. There was a little bit of chat about high hazard and defining that. Is there some others in the chat? I think we're responding to it, but is there something that you want to say about high hazard definition from the Forest Service perspective?
Yes, as far as I know, it's risk of human loss of life and or major damage to property is high hazard if the dam were to fail.
Okay. And then does FLTP also cover widen authority areas?
I'm trying to get an answer to that. So the FLTP is typically for federal lands. And I think widen amendment doesn't apply. We certainly use all kinds of other funding for widen amendment authority projects, but I don't think FLTP.
Okay, good. All right, we'll circle back if there's more onto the core. Amy, I know you were answering a lot of questions, so some of these may have already been addressed. But for the core program, could the barrier be a culvert, or are only dams eligible? Amy, is Amy still with us? Mindy, I see you. But I think this was. All right, Amy's muted. Let me see if I can help you out. If I can find you, Amy. Mindy, do you want to answer that in the meantime?
Yeah, I believe the language said in-stream barrier removal. So my assumption is that applies to something beyond a dam. I will see if Amy knows differently, but that's my understanding.
Okay, great. So Amy, it's really hard to find you with 400 people logged into this. So let me keep going here. Another question. Does this mean, this is again still for the core, does this mean that no new projects will be accepted onto the draft eligibility list?
I believe Amy answered that one in the chat, but yeah, we can still
Okay.
accept additional projects. That's still open. That was just an initial first cut list that we got. So certainly if you have another project, again, the first step is to reach out to your local core district. If you need help figuring that out, let us know, and you can get the process going that way.
Okay, and then last, is CAP restricted to AERP areas? And can you remind everyone what AERP is before that gets answered?
I'm hoping the person who wrote the question can answer that because I don't know.
Right. Sorry, Amy, I can't find you here. All right, we're gonna circle back to that one. Federal Highway, is the program specifically for culverts? It's a narrow definition, or for other fish passage barriers as well?
Yeah, and I partially answered that in the chats. It's directed to culverts and weirs, but I will say that within our agency, the distinction between what is a culvert and what is a bridge is not well defined. Any culvert that exceeds 20 feet would be placed on our bridge inspection program. And so, there's some questions that we have to resolve around that area, and it may entirely be possible through our grant program to upgrade a culvert to a bridge, if that was appropriate. And so, hopefully, when we come out with our NOFO, we're able to answer those questions that folks might have. And that's a notice of funding opportunity. And I included our website. I know there have been some questions about where all this information will be had. It's my understanding our administration will include all information about all of our grants on our website that I included in the chat. It's the Federal Highway Administration Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. If you Google that, you'll come up with our website. Thanks.
Great. So also, you may have answered this as well, but I know somebody else answered it, but from you, there was a specific question about, does anadromous fish include native Pacific lamprey on the West Coast?
Well, this bird guy did a search on Google, and I think, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but lamprey are fish and they are anadromous.
Okay. We'll just let that one sit there unless somebody else wants to. No. Okay. All right. For NOAA, is there a coastal passage limitation to the NOAA funds, or are interior rivers eligible?
Yeah, our trust resources are mostly on the coast. It does include diadromous fish, and our definition of coastal areas also includes the Great Lakes. So I would encourage everyone to read the funding opportunities when they come out. There is a section that is very specifically labeled eligibility and will cover, for instance, what it means to be doing fish passage in the Great Lakes.
Okay, for DOE, can the DOE fish passage funds be used on legacy non-federal, non-FERC licensed hydropower facilities?
It doesn't sound like from the statute, it was very clear that are FERC licensed facilities.
All right, so what about a site that is just applying for a hydro license? And will it need to install fish passage? This is for an application is, filed or close to being filed.
I would say it would have to go through the FERC licensing process first, prior to being eligible and complete and have license in hand from FERC.
Okay, great. Okay, I've got a whole bunch in this category that I've called general. So everyone's welcome to give a response if you have one here. First one being, I'd be interested in knowing about more design standards agencies are using or considering for projects receiving the funding or in general. For example, stream simulation or a particular design species, 100-year flows, anything like that. So I realize you all, this is me talking now, not the question asker. You all might not know this right off the top of your head. So if you do, feel free to let us know. If you don't, maybe if you could point us to a direction to find out this information, that would be great too. So who wants to talk? Anyone?
Not all of us at once. Design standards are extremely specific to locations and species. And I think most of us have mentioned that we do have staff available to provide technical assistance. And all I can say is that we would love to direct you to what those design standards are once we know where your project is.
I'll jump in. Yeah, this is the topic of a whole nother webinar we could cover. Forest Service standards are for stream simulation design to be strongly encouraged, not mandated, but typically all our culverts are stream simulation design. Yeah, that's a good question for some of the other agencies.
Anybody else want to take add a response to that, or should we just keep going? Last call. Okay. Will there be a database of projects that are funded under BIL across all federal agencies, or is that going to be pieced out within existing programs that will allow a national scale assessment of the types of projects and where they occur, the amount of habitat improved, connectivity metrics, species involved, et cetera, et cetera. Something that goes beyond a simple list of projects, but allows an understanding of restoration effort and impact at a national scale? That's a great question.
Yeah, Jeff, it's a great question and a great idea. We haven't moved forward to having that conversation yet in a more formal way. We've been talking about it internally, but maybe that's something we can move forward on some of our discussions we're going to have in June and July, where we try to bring different federal, state, tribal partners together and have those conversations, because it certainly is a great idea.
I second that. That is a great idea, and love to have that conversation with you all. And perhaps our national laboratories would be interested in that question too.
Great. Okay. So I know there was a little chatter around this. Well, maybe not chatter. Melanie, you made a comment about grants.gov. There was a very specific question. Are or will all of these funding opportunities show up on grants.gov? Is grants.gov the closest thing to a comprehensive resource for all federal funding, including IIJA? If not, what is the best overall source? Example, if you search grants.gov for fish passage on grants.gov, there are 159 matching results. Given the scale and complexity of matching federal funding, will project implementers searching for data management tools like grants.gov that are more comprehensive. So Melanie indicated her stuff will be on grants.gov.
But I know I did also hear from some of our other speakers today that they are not doing a traditional form of financial assistance where you apply directly. So it may be the closest thing there is to a repository. Unfortunately, it is not comprehensive.
I wrote it down.
Yeah,
Federal highways will be on grants.gov. We'll use grants.gov, yes.
because National Fish Passage is typically worked with at a region by region level. It'll probably not be an open NOFO or funding opportunity. Instead, it'll be a directed announcement with our selection criteria happening at different scales. So we don't want to say it's a national announcement when the decisions have already been made. So we'll have a little bit of a different way of moving forward with that.
Okay, great. Will any of these programs cover barrier assessment efforts? I think one of the programs said specifically assessment is involved, but I wanted to give this a chance for everyone's program to answer if those assessments will be covered through your funding.
So for Fish and Wildlife Service, in the first year of funding, it was not covered, but that doesn't mean it won't. Those kind of assessments won't be covered in future years. Under our normal fish passage program, some of those assessments could be done through that. But with the BIL passage, funding was more buried on the landscape.
For Forest Service, you know, the only program that I mentioned that could fund prioritization would be the CALR as a component. The others, the language I think does not include, you know, that type of planning work. I'm not sure about the NIFWIF challenge program. That we'll have to ask them.
And for NOAA, again, definitely look at the funding opportunities when they come out to see what is covered in there. But to echo what Mike said, we do expect things will change over time. And just because it may or may not be called out this year doesn't mean that it won't be called out in a future year.
Thank you, Melanie, and the same applies for Federal Highway. This is our first year of the grant program, and we're rushing to get a notice of funding opportunity out, and I anticipate in future years things will look different.
All right, great. How are downstream barriers being considered with each program?
Once again, I'm going to be a broken record and say, please look at our funding opportunity when it comes out.
For Federal Highways, I would say ours is very specific to passage for anadromous fish. And so that, to me, says that anadromous fish should make it up to the barrier.
I guess I'm not 100% sure what the question is. I think often when we look at project prioritization, we try to understand it at a watershed level and get a better understanding of is this the best project location considering what's upstream and downstream of it. If this is more about downstream fish screens, we do sometimes put money towards fish screens. So without knowing exactly what the question is, that's my best answer.
Yeah, I think it's general. Being site setting is kind of what it's asking about, if that's going to be an issue there. Okay. Did anybody else want to respond to that?
Well, just real quickly, our statute just says fish passage, so we'll interpret that to be upstream or downstream.
Okay. Are any of these funds from all the presentations allowed to be used for projects for compensatory mitigation credit? Grant funding often precludes getting mitigation credit.
Noah, this is another sticky question. we are building off an existing program, and that existing program it is for voluntary restoration, and you should not be using it to create compensatory mitigation credits. But again, the funding opportunities are still in development. There is a chance that something will change for these particular opportunities.
And Amy did chime in for the core, no compensatory mitigation credits for their funding. Anyone else?
For federal highways, we haven't established the criteria that we're evaluating yet. So I can't speak to that.
And I'm going to echo Daniel's answer.
Yeah, I don't know what the policy is right now for service. Good question.
Okay, this one is very specific. Yakima Nation has a fishway tunnel within their reservation, which was constructed by NOAA under the Mitchell Act. It is in need of modification. We have a 30% design in place. An Obermeyer weir is needed on an existing weir. This will open 33 miles of anadromous fish habitat and allow us to operate this fishway as we see declining base flows with climate change. What is the most applicable grant source for us to pursue? I'm going to guess Melanie's going to say, read what comes out.
I'm going to add an additional slightly unpopular answer to that, which is that I don't believe that any one federal agency is really would be serving the fish passage community well if we discouraged you away from somebody else's opportunity, because we're really only familiar with our own opportunities. And so while it would be wonderful to have a clearinghouse and one resource that would say absolutely 100% the best use of your time is to apply to that one and ignore the rest of them, I don't believe that would be fair to the fish passage community and our applicants. I think you're going to have to, unfortunately, talk to each of us about our individual programs and then make that judgment for yourself about whether you apply to one or more of them.
That's a good answer, and I'll just add that there might in future years be more coordination, but that's that would have to be established, and it's only a thought.
Nice flow chart. Everybody likes a flow chart, right? Do you have anadromous fish? Yes. No. All right. If you build a fish ladder at a dam to provide fish passage, has the barrier to fish passage been removed?
That does sound like a philosophical question, doesn't it now? Nat, what is your response?
Sounds like a joke. I think it depends on the fish species, right? Does that fish ladder or passage accomplish passage for all species? So it's a tough one to answer without specifics.
Yeah, and we know lots of times those fish ladders, especially the older ones, aren't targeted to a wide range of species for them. So I think there's a very nuanced answer that can be given that we'll just pass on. Okay, we're down to 2 minutes. I know a bunch of other questions have come in while we've been going over all the ones I pulled out of chat that got through my last one. So I'm going to try to scroll up and find, one more or two more. For the core, did somebody answer this? Yeah, I think Amy. Amy, you're all over chat. I love it. Here we go. Follow upstream simulation design will address land pay passage. Oh man, y'all are helping each other out in chat. This is great. When does NOAA expect their NOFA will come out?
I don't have that answer for you. My presentation was the duck on the pond that looks all serene. We're all doing this underneath, so it's coming.
All right, good. All right, I think we need to end here. Our time has come up. Wow, this has been fast. An hour and a half sounded long, but I know there's a lot of conversation happening in chat. It's great. You all have provided us awesome information. We really appreciate your time to put the presentations together, get the approval to chat with us, and then spend time with us this afternoon. So thank you so much. For everyone on chat who's in the meeting or just listening in, we should be posting this unless we hear from our federal friends here that they can't have it posted, but we think we're going to be able to post it on YouTube. We also have asked for them to provide us their slides, and we'll pass those out as PDF for all of our attendees today. So thank you all so much. Presenters, really thank you so much for your time here today. And we hope to get money from you soon.
Nice.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.